All right, let's dive right into this explainer of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. We're going to explore the incredibly dramatic, historically fascinating stakes behind what is absolutely one of literature's most enduring classics. We'll be looking closely at a society totally governed by rigid rules, precarious wealth, and intense public scrutiny. And we'll see exactly how all of those outside pressures shape the most intimate parts of our lives.
So here's the massive, crucial question we're going to unpack today, and it drives the entire narrative of this story. Actually, it's a question that feels just as relevant right now as it did back in the 19th century. Think about it. When everything is on the line, your financial security, your family's reputation, your own future happiness, do you make your decisions based on logical prudence, or do you just surrender entirely to passionate emotion?
Part 1. A Tale of Two Sisters, Elinor and Marianne Dashwood. To really understand this story, we have to look at it through the lens of contrast. The whole narrative hinges on how two profoundly different young women deal with the exact same disastrous circumstances. On one hand, you've got Elinor. At just 19 years old, she is the pragmatist. She literally represents the sense in the title. She strongly believes feelings should be kept private and that you have to observe common social decencies no matter how much you might be hurting inside. And then on the flip side, we have 16-and-a-half-year-old Marianne. She represents sensibility. She is highly imaginative, impulsive, and she actually believes that having strong, overpowering feelings proves you have a superior character. To her, the stiff conventions of society are just entirely beneath her notice.
Now here's a really cool fun fact. Austen herself was incredibly close to her older sister, Cassandra. In fact, they were practically inseparable from most of Jane's life. So it is definitely no coincidence that a dynamic between two sisters forms the beating heart of this work. Austen's early unpublished drafts of this very story were literally titled Elinor and Marianne, which just proves how absolutely foundational their sisterly relationship was to the creation of this masterpiece.
Part 2. The Cult of Sensibility, Emotion in the Regency Era.
Okay, we really need to reset our modern vocabulary for a second to understand what Austen and her contemporaries were actually arguing about. For Austen's audience, the word sensibility didn't mean being practical or having good sense, which is how we normally use the word sensible today. It meant having a hyper-reactive, finely tuned emotional state. Basically, to have sensibility in the Regency era meant you were deeply sentimental and highly sensitive to the world around you.
This brings us to what scholars actually call the cult of sensibility. This ideology popped up during the Romantic movement, and it suggested that having more finely tuned nerves led to greater sympathy and, by extension, more moral behavior. These thinkers wore their overpowering feelings like a badge of honor. But here is the huge catch. As Professor Julie Shafford points out in our source material, this cult of heightened emotion was dangerously weaponized against women. Because society viewed women as having smaller frames and more delicate nervous systems, they framed them as weak and easily debilitated by their passions. In fact, novels that celebrated intense sensibility were considered dangerous because people thought they might train women to expect this heightened, heroic passion from a world that was ultimately going to deny it to them.
Part 3. Money and Marriage Rules, the Economics of Regency Romance.
Let's move over to the harsh economic reality of the Regency era, because this is what builds the massive dramatic stakes for our heroines. Austen's world isn't just about fancy drawing rooms and dances, it's about cold, hard economics. Because women were barred from inheriting estates, this brutal chain of events leaves the Dashwood sisters virtually penniless and incredibly vulnerable. When their wealthy father dies, his vast estate legally bypasses his current wife and daughters, going entirely to his son John from a previous marriage. Now, John initially intends to help them out, but his manipulative wife Fanny quickly talks him into giving his half-sisters pretty much nothing. Overnight, Elinor, Marianne, their youngest sister Margaret, and their mother are given just one single month to pack up and vacate their lifelong home.
Without that wealth, the sisters are thrown headfirst into a totally ruthless marriage market, where financial survival almost always trumps romantic love. Remember, women at this time couldn't even legally enter into contracts. The only really respectable job available was being a governess, which was poorly paid and super lonely. Marriage wasn't just about romance, it was a crucial familial alliance, and typically, you needed a substantial dowry to secure a good match. And just like that, the Dashwood sisters' dowries are gone. So, thrust into this completely communal, deeply judgmental society at their new, humble home of Barton Cottage, Elinor and Marianne have to navigate the prying eyes of their neighbors just to find a little bit of peace. Their lives are absolutely no longer private, their financial ruin and their romantic prospects become the subject of endless, swirling gossip by the local community. They are just totally swamped by a society that prizes mercenary, money-driven values over genuine affection.
Part 4. Heartbreak and Healing. Parallel paths of love and loss. This brings us right to the romantic trials of the two sisters. They both face profound heartbreak, but they handle it in completely opposite ways. While Marianne dives into this deeply public whirlwind romance with the dashing, highly sensible Mr. Willoughby, Elinor quietly buries her own growing affection for the melancholic, sensible, and I mean sensible in the modern sense of the word, Edward Ferrars. Both sisters think they've found their perfect matches. But as we know, in Jane Austen's world, the path to true love is basically never smooth.
This contrast perfectly captures their totally different coping mechanisms. When tragedy hits, Marianne physically and emotionally collapses under the massive weight of her own sensibility. Willoughby abruptly ditches her and gets engaged to an heiress for her money, and Marianne just indulges and feeds her grief, completely ignoring all social decorum. Meanwhile, Elinor endures her devastation in total, crushing silence. She finds out that Edward is bound by honor to a secret 4-year engagement with the clever and highly manipulative Lucy Steele. Because Elinor is sworn to secrecy and determined to protect her family from even more distress, she hides her broken heart behind a perfect mask of calm composure.
The climax of the story proves that excessive sensibility is quite literally dangerous. It nearly kills Marianne before she's finally saved by her family and the steadfast Colonel Brandon. In a total fit of romantic despair, Marianne wanders through a terrible winter storm just to gaze at Willoughby's distant estate. She catches a fever, becomes gravely ill, and hovers right on the brink of death. It's only the reliable, mature Colonel Brandon who rides through the night to fetch her mother. When Marianne miraculously pulls through, the tide finally turns. By spring, a wild twist of fate frees Edward. His brother actually ends up marrying Lucy Steele instead, and Edward rushes back to finally propose to a completely shocked and joyful Elinor.
Part 5. A Timeless Love Story. The Legacy of Sense and Sensibility.
Austen's narrative climax is about way more than just tying things up with a double wedding. It's this profound commentary on personal growth and survival in a super restrictive world. The true takeaway here is that both sisters absolutely had to learn from each other to find happiness. It proves that a fulfilling life requires a balance of both head and heart. Elinor, who held literally everything inside, finally breaks down into explosive, cathartic tears when she realizes Edward is free. And Marianne, who used to mock second attachments and quiet love, learns to deeply appreciate the steady, unwavering devotion of Colonel Brandon, and she happily accepts his proposal.
And this is exactly why modern adaptations keep this 19th century classic feeling incredibly fresh today. The internal battle between logic and emotion is just such a universal human experience. Austen wasn't writing a simple, fluffy fairy tale. She wrote a brilliant, nuanced critique of society and a masterful psychological study of how we process desire and disappointment.
I love how modern adapter Jessica Swale puts it. She notes that Austen uses romantic love not just as the end goal, but as a vehicle to generate deeper familial love and community. The Dashwoods survive their brutal displacement and that vicious marriage market not just by finding husbands, but by relying on the deep, unbreakable bond of their sisterhood and the genuine community they managed to build around themselves.
So, I want to leave you with this to consider about your own life, especially as we all navigate our own modern world of intense public scrutiny and high-stakes decisions. When the chips are totally down, which sister's path are you walking? Are you holding it all together with sheer willpower like Elinor, or are you letting yourself feel every single drop of the storm like Marianne? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope it gave you some fascinating insights into the enduring brilliance of Jane Austen.